Hi, Comp 1. This is our Dominant Impression Unit Video 2. We've talked a lot about detailing, sensory details, connotative diction to create a scene, a description. Today I want to talk to you about reading art like you would read literature. In the previous video and in the writing exercises we have assigned this week, we've asked you to look at connotative diction to build a mood, the emotional effect of a piece. Concrete and sensory detailing, adding figurative language, the lyrical and cadent qualities. We've asked you to look at objective versus subjective detailing, how you would omit or select certain details to create the mood or to allow for different moods to appear based on what you omit or what you select. Vantage point versus point of view, the vantage point being the place in which you place the writer and how they're looking at the scene versus the perspective of what's going on in the scene. Okay, so adding on to these, we also want to begin looking at the rhetorical devices that really truly build meaning. Without these particular rhetorical devices, you still have nice writing with the figurative language and the cadent and lyrical qualities, but just like in writing, art requires that we see symbolism, that we see allusions, that we recognize that there is a juxtaposition within the piece, maybe irony, paradox, or an allegory. Reading art like literature. What is the message? Good readers, like good artists, find meaning and message with every word and every brush stroke. And just as authors specifically and pointedly place words and phrases to create a persuasive message, so do artists. In the placement of dominant figures, the selection of size, color, light, and dark, they build a scene. The addition of specific ornamental or significant symbolic objects enhance the message. When we're examining a work of art, the first thing we typically want to do is determine the central subjects. If you recall, in the American Gothic, the central subject is the man and the woman, but even more central is that pitchfork. The second thing we look for in a piece of art, especially involving human characters, is archetypes. The archetypes that we often recognize, you also see in literature: the innocent, the orphan or the regular human, the caregiver, the rebel, the lover, the hero, the villain, and the divine. And I found this website for you that I think you can see that an archetype comes from the origin of the Greek word archein, which means pattern, model, or type. The concepts are derived, copied, modeled, or emulated. Carl Gustav Jung is a psychologist that writes about archetypes quite frequently. The ego, soul, and self. So here are some of the ego types. Here's the innocent, free to be you and me. The orphan or the regular guy or gal. You can see there the different things that happen with that particular character. There's the hero. The caregiver, it's often a feminine character. The soul types, you have the explorer, the rebel, the lover, the creator. And the creator can be both human creating something physically, tangibly, and also divine. And then you have more like the jester, the sage, the magician, the ruler, or more powerful. Okay? So we look for those archetypes in a piece of art as well as within literature, because once we see what kind of a character has been placed, we can start to understand the message. We can see symbolism. We can see whether there's religious, cultural, or historical layers within that piece of art or that the literature. We also find that symbolism can also be embedded within the allusions to literature or history. And if you recall what allusions are, they are references to history, mythology, religion, real people, real places, real events. We also want to examine the placement of objects in the foreground and the background of a piece of art, and consider how their placement is important in relation to that main subject. We want to also examine the use of light and dark. Many authors and artists will use light and dark as a juxtaposition of good and evil, of enlightenment, or being unenlightened, or in the cave, or barbaric or uncivilized. Many things layered within the use of light and dark. We also want to examine the minute details of a painting. This is really where you start detailing. Why did they provide these specific details within the scene? Do they further the message overtly or obscurely? Did they place something, this itty-bitty little object that has meaning in a bigger sense? Or are they just rather obscure? And through all of that, you want to examine the mood of the piece. What draws your heart? What draws your eyes? What mood do you see that you would like to detail? And for our purposes, keep in mind that when we go to the Nelson Atkins Museum, you will be asked to look at a piece of art from two different moods, the same piece of art. And therefore, you need to choose a piece that is rich, that you can see totally different things happening depending on the vantage or the perspective or the words and selection of detail that you would create the mood with. Okay, so the American Gothic painting, the foreground and the background are distinctly different. The foreground, you have the people and the pitchfork, and in the background you have this house that has a really interesting, almost church style window with black curtains. And if you were to really dig in and look very closely, the windows are all covered, but there's this little bit of life on the porch with cacti. Very interesting choice of plant. So you have this background of a white house, and you have these two foreground characters that seem extremely solemn and stoic, both wearing black. And typically wearing black is a symbol of death or tragedy or even despair. So there's something going on here with the white of the house and the darkness in the foreground of the two subjects, besides the fact that their facial expressions are quite dour. Somebody mentioned in their detailing that her hair was pulled back very tightly, and that there was a single tendril that had escaped and was wisping almost in defiance of this this dour, stoic, solemn picture. So as you are thinking about how to gather details to write about, you have three basic things that you can look at first and foremost, and write down the different things that you see. In the background, you have these rounded trees that really kind of mimic the head shape of the people. And so there's very sharp lines, and then there's very soft lines. The most important thing, I think, besides the two subjects in the American Gothic painting is that pitchfork. And typical pitchforks had 4 prongs, and they were much thicker metal. So there is something definitely about this particular pitchfork. It's actually a trident with the 3 prongs, and that also has religious and mythological symbolism, which you might want to take a look at. I also took some selections from your writing over the American Gothic that you guys had opened the doc and shared and written. You can see that there's a lot of telling in these selections. What I would like you to do is, as a group, I would like you to upload this particular screenshot and walk through it by yourself first, and cross out the areas where you have telling and rewrite the sentences so that you have showing. I want you to practice that. I've just chosen some sections for you. Pick a couple and walk through them and do that exercise. After you've completed that, this is a new picture that I would like you to look at. It's the Midnight Ride. And this piece is just fabulous. Again, you're going to detail foreground, background, look for symbols and allusions. There are no specific subjects in this particular painting. You might argue that the church is a prominent subject, and the horse and rider would be subject too. So when you're looking at this particular piece, what draws the eye is this church, this central church. And it's full of light. It's a dark scene except in this area. When you're reading this like a piece of literature, you're looking for symbols and for signs and for layers. Water is always symbolic in literature, and you have water cutting right between the light and the dark. You also have small areas of light approaching from the distance. You have lights coming on in the houses as the horse is ridden through, and people hanging out the windows. But really what you're looking for is in detailing, what is the mood that you would write towards? What particular elements would you select, and what particular elements would you omit when you are describing this scene? There's movement here, which makes it a lot easier to write about. And you can take a mood word like warning, because this is Paul Revere's ride and the British are coming. So it could be a warning. It could be something more desperation. You can do something more positive. We will fight them. But you create all of your word choice and all of your selections support that mood. You can juxtapose good, evil, light, dark, but overall you're supporting and embellishing and creating this intensity towards the mood that you have selected. So I hope this helps you a little bit. The many ways that you read art like literature, looking for those archetypes, looking for symbolism, especially religious, cultural, or historical. You still want to avoid telling a story. It is not your job to tell a story. Instead, you are to describe this scene as a piece of a work of art, that we can see it without you telling, that you have shown us what the author or the artist has intended.